All right, folks, I'm going to walk you through this equipment that we're going to be using for this occultation. I know a lot of you haven't had a chance to work with this equipment yet, and hopefully this training video will help answer some of your questions and get you ready and up to speed so that when you get to the field, you'll know what you're looking at for starting the practice nights. So let me introduce you to the equipment. It's all in these 4 crates, everything that you need for doing the observations. The first 3 crates here contain the telescope. So we've got, first crate has telescope base pieces. Second crate has more base pieces. And the third crate has the telescope itself. And this 4th crate over here has all of the accessories, the bolts, tools, power, camera, laptop, everything else. And you'll find in this a sheet which has an inventory of all the parts that's on there. And that'll be useful for you when you're packing up to make sure that you haven't lost anything. So we're going to start with the setup and show you how this works. We first start with the base piece of the telescope. This has the azimuth motor on there. It's very heavy, so it's always good to have 2 people. When you're in the field, you want to make sure this is level, and there'll be tools to help you do that. We're not going to worry about that now, but just remember it. In the bottom of the crate, there's one more panel, and this will go on the back side of the base. And then in this crate, we pick up the side pieces. There's 2 side pieces. This is the light and easy one to handle. It's just got a handle and a brace, and this goes on this side. Okay. And then pull a piece of foam out. There's the other side, which has the motor. This one's very heavy. So we'll set that down here and then let you hold on to it. It's not bolted in place. So there's a plastic box in the crate. And inside this plastic box is all the bits and pieces that makes this thing work. And here's a bag that you'll find that has lots of these bolts. There's 12 of these that has a bushing and a rubber washer. Those are the ones that we care about for this point. So here you go, there's 2 of them for the base on both sides. There's some metal inserts in the bottom that the screws go into. And you don't want to over tighten these bolts, just get them reasonably tight, but don't really crunch it down, otherwise you flatten the rubber washer and eventually you'll destroy that, which we don't want to do. Let's get the back plate, the base in, 2 bolts at the bottom, and then on the sides, the back plate mounts on the inside into the threaded inserts. And then there's one more piece that goes at the foot of the brace. At this point, we have a structurally sound base, and we're ready for the telescope. So there's 2 things important at this point before I put the telescope on. There's a clutch. This here is the elevation clutch, and that lets the elevation axis move. You can see that. And we leave this tight but snug, and you probably really shouldn't be able to move it by hand there. It's not critical, but you just definitely don't want this to just be free spinning. You'll see why in a second. Here's the azimuth clutch. If you loosen it all the way, you can spin this around. And again, we tighten that so that it's snug and doesn't want to move on its own. Now we're ready for the telescope. So we bring this, get the telescope out, set this up, 2 people lifting it up out of the case, and set it down. The white end of the telescope is where the mirror is, and that's the heaviest part of the telescope. It's always should be loaded in the case when it's off to the right, just for standardization purposes. And we can tip it up, pull the plastic baggie off. Your bag may or may not look like this, but we hopefully have a translucent bag for everybody. Okay, so here's the tube, and important thing to note, there's two anchor points. There's that piece, and then this one. There's nothing about this. It's smooth, there's no cuts, there's no features on it whatsoever. It's going to fit in on these rollers. The other side has the cleat, and you notice that it's aligned in this direction. That's why we want this piece here pointed up. Okay? There's a screw hole at the top, and it's ready to go here. So now the next step is that we orient the telescope. This part goes on the rollers. This more complicated part goes on the right. And tip it up and put it on horizontally onto the mounts. And you just got to get it to line up with that slot and go down. Whoever's holding the mirror needs to hang on to the mirror and not let go, because they've got all the weight. And it's because it's not safe yet. Now, my job, because I had the front end, is to pick up the other two bolts. There you go. Those bolts might be in with the baggie that the other bolts came in, or might be something else. There's two of them, a shorter, more stout bolt, and a slightly more longer, more complicated bolt. This is the one that goes on the top on this side. It goes right in a screw hole on the top, threaded in, shouldn't fight you. This is merely a safety so that it doesn't slide apart. It's not like you have to make it super tight to be safe. And then the final screw goes in on the side through the axle. And again, provides just enough safety so that the legs of the support don't fall apart. Now, at this point, it's structurally sound, but the mirror wants to be down, and you should just go ahead and let it be down. So take off the shower cap, covers up the top end of the telescope, and the next step is to extend the secondary mechanism. So there's 3 screws on the side. You just loosen them up and then go up, and there was 2 clicks, and we want to go to the second one, which is basically the end. You bring it up and you tighten the screws. It doesn't have to be super tight, just nice and snug is good. And now the telescope is balanced. Whatever position you put it at, it'll stay at. Okay? We can move it around, point it anywhere by hand, even without the motors going. The other piece that you'll probably want to do at this point is to take off the cover if you're out in the field and you're about ready to use it. And I recommend storing that inside the telescope crate. In fact, that's another safety tip. When you're out in the field, it tends to be kind of dirty. So once you get everything out, then keep all the foam in the boxes and keep them closed during the night so that you don't pick up dust and dirt unnecessarily. Okay, so we've got an assembled telescope. Now let's wire it up. So I'm going to spin it around so you can see the back side. We've got cables in another bag. There's 2 cables, one that goes from this base motor through the leg up to the side motor. That's a cable that looks like this, a little bit like a network wire, and a little ferrule on one end. And it doesn't matter, I don't think it matters which end, they're the same. So you plug it into the azimuth motor, AZ motor it says there, and you plug it in. Here it says AZ motor.
These are a little bit stiff, so when you take them out, you have to really get a good grip on them.
The second cable is for the hand controller, and that's in this pink anti-static bag. This is the computer that runs the telescope. So you plug this in.
Fat end.
I think,
The fat
yeah.
end goes in here.
Yeah, this is, you can get this wrong because you can actually, this small end of this cable will go in here and here, but the fat end can only go one place. So if you put the fat end into the controller, the other end into the motor drive, now you're ready to go, and then you can put the hand paddle in the bracket until you're ready for the next step. Also in the baggie is a power cord, and we'll set this up here in a second. You want to get the
Power supply.
Get the power supply is in the accessories box. It's a little battery pack that we have to charge each night. You'll notice there was, in this baggie there was another cable in here. Don't be alarmed if there's extra parts in the box that we don't use. We've kept everything, but there's some things we're just not going to use. So here's what powers the camera and the telescope is a battery pack. If when you're in your hotel room in between nights of practice, make sure to always leave this thing charging because it takes a long time. So you just plug it into there. The other port here is for the camera, which we'll get to in a second. And let's go back to the Zenith, spin it around.
It plugs in here.
And you could put the battery pack here. And the reason we do this is because this thing can spin around and around and around, and you don't want the cables to get wacky on you and get caught on things. So you can thread it through the arm and then plug it into the motor here. And now the cables are all nice, neat and tucked away, and we now have power to the telescope. Now, we're not outside at night, obviously, but there is a cool startup mode for this telescope, which is great if you're trying to get set up and it's cloudy. If you level the telescope, and there's a level in your toolkit, make it level, point it so the telescope is pointed north. We assume that this is the right thing to do in the southern hemisphere too, but we'll have to double check that. Level and north, and then you turn it on. One of the startup modes is to say the telescope's level and north. You turn it on and it starts tracking the sky and you can use it immediately. And that's the mode that we're going to use right now because we don't have stars. The power's on. The first thing you'll see, it's also got backlighting in there so it works as well during the day and the night. Right now it says SynScan version, and there's a bunch of numbers that tells you the version of the firmware of the telescope. You don't really need to know that, except you can't do anything until you get past this prompt telling you what that is. What you do is if you want to go forward through any menu tree or set of questions on the hand paddle, your response is always enter. We have already found out that if you hit escape at this point, it freaks everything out and you'll have to start all over again. So I'm going to hit enter. The next thing it says is warning you never to point the telescope at the sun. Just hit enter and it'll get rid of that. The next thing it does is you have to set the longitude. It will remember the last longitude that you put in. I'm not going to do it now, but basically east and west, you could just use the arrow buttons to change it east and west. It's these arrow buttons at the bottom, and then if you want to go left, right, you use the arrow buttons in the middle of the pad. And just type the right number in. When you're done, you press enter. It does the same thing for latitude. Enter, set the time zone. What we recommend is that you pretend that you're always on Greenwich. So you want to set the time zone to 0. Enter, set your elevation. Again, it remembers that. I'm not going to, it's right now set at 0. We'll leave it there. Then you put the date in. This you have to get right, and it's got to be right for tonight. It won't remember It has no clock in it. It'll just remember what the last setting was. So today is May, so 05, and it's the 10th, so 10, and then 2017. Now the date's in there, you hit enter, and it asks you for the time. Now you put in the UT time. So here, the UT time is 23:40, 00, and I actually do it so that it's a little bit ahead of the current time, and I'll watch another timepiece, wait for the time to advance. When it's at the time that you've entered in, you hit enter, and then it goes to a screen that shows you the time, and you can check it against your timepiece. If you didn't like that, you can escape and go back and try again. You like the time, you hit enter. Daylight savings, no, because we're in universal time. And it says the next screen is begin alignment. Now on the sky, when you got stars, you're going to say yes, and it's going to take you through a long series of questions to find stars and reference stars. We're not going to cover that in this video. You'll get that in the field training. No, it bypasses all of that kind of stuff and just uses the level and north trick. So I say a 2, and now it's set up. The telescope now thinks it knows, and if I actually was north and put the right latitude and longitude in, you can say go to the moon, it'll actually find the moon. It's pretty amazing. Okay, we're not going to go through all of the hand paddle functions, but it basically at this point, having done this much, which goes pretty fast when you know what you're doing and you practice and you take it in the field, you can drive around and find things in the sky. The paddle works. You can move it by hand. You can grab the telescope and move it by hand, go back to moving it with the motor. It will not lose its pointing when it does this. It's pretty amazing. There's some details that we'll go through in the training session about doing high precision pointing, but we don't really need to worry about that right now. Okay, so now the next thing that we're going to do, now that we've got it collimated, we get the finder telescope on. And in the box, this is the finder telescope, a white bracket, black tube. We've got the 2 caps on this. Make sure to put that somewhere clean and not just let it fly around on the ground. So this gets mounted onto the bracket near where the eyepiece goes. Be really careful about this. It's kind of a stupid design. If you look, there's a little cleat on the bottom. If I was designing this, I'd put the cleat on the top so that gravity would hold it in place. With this now, if you don't tighten it up, it'll fall right back out again. So if you're thinking you're being very clever, putting it horizontal, you put it in there, gee, it's fine, and lift it up, this thing will fall out and could land on the mirror. That would be bad. So just make sure when you put this thing in, press it all the way up and tighten this screw down good and hard, pretty much as hard as you can tighten it. And then it's not going to go anywhere.
We noticed that a couple of them, even when you tighten it, were still a little loose. So you definitely have to make sure that it's very tight.
So if you have a weak person on your team and a strong person on your team, let the strong person do this tightening because it really does have to be tightened down very hard. If you're careful and you don't bang this thing around too much, this should remember the bore sight alignment between where this is pointing and looking and where the telescope is pointing. But if you have to change the collimation, you will have to redo the bore sight. You can do this during the daytime in some distant object or on Jupiter or the moon or some bright star. And we'll go through that in the field too, but these 2 knobs here will adjust the alignment between the 2. Okay, we're ready for the camera now. And generally speaking, we won't use eyepieces with this equipment, but the camera is in a white box in the accessories box. And let's just pull this out, open it up, and right on the top is the camera and a piece of foam. Just grab the foam and pull that out, and then you can work the camera out of the foam. So you've got the camera. There's a piece in your kit that looks like this. There's a slightly flanged side to it, and then threads on this side and threads on the inside. This piece will screw into the face of the camera. Okay? Make sure that's reasonably snug. Now that piece is ready to go right into the barrel. And then you adjust the focus of the telescope this way. Next, I'm going to show the cabling of the system. So we've got inside the bottom of the box, there is a power cord. And inside the big white plastic box is a 10-foot USB cord. And you'll see why we need that one. There's also a USB cord in the camera, but it's shorter. So the power connection is from this power cord. It goes into the center conductor. I like to run the cable down the tube, kind of give it a turn around this screw here, tuck the wires back up underneath, and get it back out to the battery pack, and you plug it in. Now, there is a tell on here. You see the power lights on. This one, as soon as you plug it in and you turn that power on, you should hear the camera running. I don't hear that right now, and this is one of our problems with this system, is that this conductor won't seat in quite far enough, and we will have a solution for that, but this is basically how you do it. You plug that in, turn it on, and then this should be powered on. The next thing is, so now we've got, this is the long USB cable. Now you notice the cables up to now have all been self-contained within the telescope. So it's free to move and spin around and nothing gets caught. This is the one exception. As soon as you connect this, the telescope needs to move around, but the computer that's going to read the data out is not going to go with the telescope. So now you have to watch out when you move around on the sky to make sure that you don't snag this cable or drag your laptop all around in the dirt. The next piece we need is the GPS antenna. That's also in the box here. And again, there are some extra pieces and parts inside the camera box. Don't lose them, but don't worry about them if you don't use every part that's in there. So the GPS antenna looks like this. It has a square module on the end. It's actually magnetic, so you can find some place to put it so that it gets a signal from the sky, and then you screw it into the back of the camera. And you want to do this kind of like when you're really starting up, because it needs to sit and get a signal from the sky for a while. I don't know if this, yeah, so it actually is magnetic, and you can put it there, and you can tie down these wires or get it somewhere where it's not going to mess things up, and you're ready to go with the camera. The final piece is the computer, and the computer is stored in your case. This is not the actual one, this is mine, but you'll have a computer in here that you set up, and you just want to make sure that you're plugging this into a USB 3 port, which you see because it's got blue in there. And so once you get the computer booted, you plug that in, and then you're ready to go. You start up the SharpCap software, and it goes into a live preview mode immediately. I'm not going to demonstrate this now. You'll all get a chance to practice with this. But now at that point, you're ready to go. You're seeing pictures on the sky. Focus the telescope and drive off, and you can find the field, and you're ready to go. After you practice this a couple of times, this will go really fast. With 2 people, you ought to be able to set up in like 5 or 10 minutes. If you're wondering about the switch on the power supply, there's a big knob on there that says on and off. That's for turning it on for doing jump starting your car. It has nothing to do with powering the camera. That's why I recommend when you're plugging things in and powering them on, listen. You will hear the camera, a fan in the camera running. And if you don't hear that fan, there's something wrong and you need to chase that down. And in this case, it's just because that connector won't seat fully in there. Other failure modes that you might have is not having the clutches tight enough, in which case wind might blow the telescope and it won't hold pointing. You just have to make sure that they're tight enough. And the people that are training you will tell you how tight to do it and give you an example of how to do that. The final piece I want to show you is is a couple other things that are in the case. And in fact, you can actually use your crates as desks out in the field. So instead of setting your laptop on the ground like I just did, you can use the telescope box or something like that. Just remember, you got to move it around when you're slewing. Okay, so in the crate with the accessories, we've got another chamber over here, which we've got a toolkit. There's a lot of common tools. I hope you never have to even open it and use it. When you do, you'll notice a funny design thing that it wants to eject the socket extension and throw it on the ground for you. It's not entirely helpful.
And there's the level that you need.
This is the piece that always wants to come out. There's a level in here. There's measures, tools. Generally speaking, this is for emergencies we hope never happen, but we don't want to leave you in the field without anything. The other thing that's in here is a couple of tarps. There's a silver tarp and a white tarp. The purpose of these is, if you wish, and it's kind of suggested, before you set up the equipment, spread out the silver tarp on the ground so that you're walking around on that, and it keeps the dirt off the equipment a little bit better. And you can just leave that down the whole time you're working. The white tarp is to cover the telescope, and it's really intended to cover the telescope during the day. If you happen to be in a place where you leave it set up throughout the day, you could put this on there for safety reasons and also to keep it from heating up, and the white will just reflect off. And I'm not sure that we're going to do that in the field, but it's here just in case you want to do that. But the only other thing to mention in here, there's a little screwdriver kit in here. Again, I hope you never have to use it, but it's there just in case. And there's a bunch of other things. This is the barrel extender I talked about, which can move the camera out. Here's a 1 1/4 inch eyepiece holder. And there are a couple of eyepieces in there. There's a 10 millimeter and a 25 millimeter if you want to look around. You better might not be doing that on event night, okay? Event night is not about sightseeing. It's about getting the data. And that's one other caution that I'll give you now, is that the longer you leave the equipment out, the colder it's going to get, the more susceptible it's going to be to dew. So you don't want to get set up 8 hours before the event and just sit around and wait. You'll want to learn how long it takes you to set it up, then get out in the field and get set up just in time for the event and do the event and tear it down. That also means that you won't use up the laptop battery, because that's basically all you have for power in your laptop while you're in the field observing is whatever you've got on the laptop.
So make sure your laptop is charged.
So before you go out, make sure your laptop is always charged, and in between observing sessions, make sure to always leave your battery pack charged up as well. It's going to get dirty. It's going to get dusty. Fine, live with it. Do not try to clean it, ever. Okay, the worst thing you can do to optics like this is clean it, unless you know exactly what you're doing. And there isn't anybody on our team that knows how to do this. So don't do it. You'll only make it worse. Frost is a problem, and I don't know for sure that this will work, but if you've got the telescope pointed to the north, if I had to wait and I was worried about frost, I would put this up, I'd put the cover on, and I'd put the shower cap on the telescope so that it doesn't super cool. And this might help protect it a little bit, but I have no idea how much protection that's going to be. Basically, if it's frosty and dewy, you're out of luck. And we're at the mercy of the weather where we're working, and that's just the nature of the beast. We're trying to pick places that are not wet. So that shouldn't be a problem, but weather can always do weird things to you. And that's your system, and I hope that you get some great data and learn more about New Horizons target. Thanks.